Welcome to NACD's BoardVision. I'm Peter Gleason, Managing Director of the NACD, and I'm joined today by Cloyd from PwC Center for Board Governance. Welcome, It's great to have you with us.
Peter, always enjoy doing these with you.
We just finished up our Directorship 2020 session here in LA. Chuck Underwood spoke about the generational issues. Really interesting when we look at the differences in the generational breakdowns as Chuck presented them and how boards need to consider that in terms of a variety of factors. But what were your key thoughts in terms of the generational issue that Chuck brought up?
Whether you agree with everything, I think we all have to acknowledge that there are differences in the generations. But those differences, for those of us who've been in the workplace for a while, I think we've witnessed them or lived them in our own ways. And the challenge is really, what should our directors, how should they be looking at this? Right. And how should they be looking at this in their roles on the board? And I think that's, both in their roles of the oversight of management and the company and how it's impacting the company, but also how it might be impacting the boardroom directly.
Well, I also think that it was really interesting as he went through the different generations, and he talked about the GIs and the silent generation that followed them, the baby boomers, the Gen X's, and now the Millennials, and the various characteristics that each of those bring or brought in some of the cases of the older generations that they brought to the leadership of the organizations. Exactly. And how companies had to leverage that at the time. So we saw great leadership coming out of the GIs who, really kind of set the table, so to speak, in terms of leadership at the organizations. And then we saw people following and executing. And now we're seeing a new generation of leaders come in and how that's influencing.
And him defining that generation of leaders coming in now is actually the boomers.
Right.
Which I'm still wrapping my head around, in terms of why that's how we're looking at that as the current leadership generation.
And this is why we didn't have the agreement that we maybe have had on some of the other topics in the past. It was personal to the people sitting in the audience. You kind of get wrapped up in the labels a little bit, and I don't think that was his point. He was trying to say, these are the characteristics that we need to be aware of as we try to manage the performance of our organizations and leveraging the characteristics of each of those groups.
And I think, Peter, I agree completely, and I think one of the takeaways for me as he was talking about why there are generational differences, if I recall correctly, he defined it that people grow up with their core values. Right. And those formative years are essentially until someone is 18, and you can't ignore that impacts then how they react, how they do things for the rest of their lives.
Right. He was talking about how the millennial generation, as he defined it in the age bracket, is so much more technologically adept that we as board members and business leaders have to understand how to leverage that, because they're going to be the enablers of the performance as we go forward. So you still have that leadership component that may be in the boomers and the Gen X's, but this new group, and I'll use that term broadly, this new group of millennials that are in the workforce right now have a different approach to business. And by leveraging their knowledge of technology and how that just impacts their entire lives, we're still looking at the potential for great performance at our companies.
And I think that was something, Peter, because that struck me too, that when he described the millennials, he described them with great optimism.
Absolutely.
Total optimism, really, in terms of what they were bringing to the workforce in terms of their creativity, their drive, their ability. I think I understood him to say he also felt like at the point in time that they become leaders, they will be fantastic leaders too, and also he saw that the combination of the boomers being in leadership positions with the millennials being really part of that core workforce now was a truly dynamic combination.
Right. And I think one of the things he kept saying or referring back to was find the talent in the millennial group and fast track it.
He did say that.
Because they're so talented and they think so differently that the innovation is going to be driven through that group within the organization.
Well, and I think, Peter, one of the other things that, and my understanding of why he was really talking about that boomer generation needing to focus on the millennials was that he felt like when you looked at some of the Gen Xers, many times they are not the best people managers. So I took that as one of the, and again, maybe that's a management function in terms of how they do this, but still going back to the board and how they ask the questions and how they assess this in their own organizations.
Exactly. And while they weren't the strength on the people leadership, they were the idea development and idea leadership. So they're the
Exactly.
innovators. They're thinking forward in terms of what are the new processes, what are the new products, what are the new
Exactly.
services we have to offer as organizations. I think when I try to encapsulate what Chuck was talking about, it was really leveraging the strengths of the various generations because they each bring something different to bear. And if we understand that at a board level, we understand the talent management element to that, we're really looking at how do we take our companies to the next level by
Exactly.
leveraging the talent that's within. We'll continue this dialogue as we move forward, Mary Ann. Thank you so much for your participation today.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on BoardVision today. I'm Peter Gleason for the National Association of Corporate Directors, and we look forward to talking with you soon.